Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for gathering here again. We are in the last session for the day 2 of the 5th edition of the Bodh Gaya Global Dialogues. And for this session, there'll be a lead presentation by Dr. Abhishek Amar,
No, I
Associate
can't hear
Professor,
anything.
Hamilton College, New York. Dr. Abhishek Singh Amar is currently working as an associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the Hamilton College, New York. After completing his PhD from School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London in 2009, he was a research fellow at the Kate Hamburger Project at the Ruhr University, Germany in 2009-10, and a visiting associate professor in the School of Historical Studies at the Nalanda University in 2015-16. Amar has published a co-authored book titled Archaeological Gazetteer of Gaya District and a co-edited volume titled Cross-Disciplinary Perspectives on a Contested Buddhist Site, Bodh Gaya Jataka, and several peer-reviewed articles in journals, Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Material Religion, and edited volumes. More recently, Amar has been directing a digital humanities project titled Sacred Centers in India to create a database of temples, sculptures, and other remains of Gaya and Bodh Gaya. And for moderating the session, I would like to invite Dr. Manish Sinha, Professor, Magad University, Bodh Gaya. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I welcome Dr. Abhishek Amar to this 5th Bodh Gaya Dialogues, and he has been already introduced. His profile is so impressive, and the area in which he is working is a niche area, and through his writings and his research, he has been enriching the knowledge base in this area. You're most welcome, Professor Amar, to begin your. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
We can hear you, but it is quite faint. Yeah.
Is this better now?
You need to increase the volume a little more. Audience? यहाँ वहाँ से वॉल्यूम आपके पास है क्या? बस मॉडरेट करिए उसको.
Is it better now?
Yes. It's perfectly right.
Okay. I unfortunately don't have a PowerPoint today, so I won't be able to show you any visuals. That's because of my health. I haven't been well for the last couple of days, but because of my commitment, I still decided to come and give a paper. So I'll go ahead and read the paper, and I hope we'll have sufficient time at the end I'll have sufficient time to answer some of the questions or whatever questions people have or clarifications people have in Q&A session. So I'll start. The South Bihar or Magda region, being the heartland of Buddhist and Brahmanical religious traditions in the ancient and medieval periods, has a rich material assemblage. Apart from major historical and sacred sites such as both Gaya, Nalanda, and Gaya, every third or fourth village in the region has mounds, artifacts, sculptures, and/or inscriptions from the pre-modern period. Each of these remnants has been reinterpreted. Most images, irrespective of their past religious affiliations, are being worshipped. Similarly, mounds are also presented as indicators of a glorious past, which were linked to some historical or legendary figure from the Hindu epics or Puranic texts. This paper will investigate the different ways in which communities have reused, engaged, and interpreted material remains, traces, including mounds, images, and temples of the past, and how these complex interactions have produced multiple histories. These interactions are evident in the process of rematerialization. Rematerialization in this paper refers to the reusage and reinterpretations of ancient and early medieval mounds, images, and temples in their newly situated socio-religious contexts as co-constitutive phenomena of interactions between human and material remains. The paper demonstrates how this has resulted in the production of multiple pasts that are in circulation locally and beginning to become authoritative historical accounts at the state level. Now, this was the introduction, and what I want to say here, I mean, correlate this introduction with the title of the paper that I have here, which is Heritage and Culture of Magad Region, right? Past and contemporary. So, I mean, this is a very broad, open-ended topic, and that's why I thought about, instead of discussing the ancient stuff, which I always do, and I found that to be most fascinating, I decided to think more about the contemporary uses of the older materials. And this is based more on my conversations or encounters with people, local people in the villages when I was conducting field survey in the region. And a part of this also draws on whatever I have published in the area, published on the region, particularly the gadgeteers and all that, which is very rich. But um, people, I mean, scholars, when they think about their research question, I mean, they are often very limited in their approach when they think about the materials. And I think this paper, or what I'm trying to present here, has evolved more from the material than my own viewpoints over a period of time. I mean, gradually I have learned from the material, from the local usage, to think about these issues which were never part of my research agenda when I was conducting PhD research or later on. So in a way, this is like coming a full circle. And that in a way kind of also draws on my own scholarly journey so far. In terms of historiography, I don't want to get into that, but people who have worked on the region know that there have been multiple scholars in the colonial period, like Alexander Cunningham, Markham Kitto, there's and several others who have Oral Stein. I mean, I can go on and list Bloch. All of these people were instrumental in surveying, and they were the first few to actually document all the material remains from this region. Obviously, they did not do village to village survey, which is possible today because of modern infrastructure and all that. But this work has drawn significantly on their research and documentation of how people were using some of these sculptures at those points of time, say in the 19th century, different parts of 19th century. So I have drawn on the colonial rediscovery of India's lost past, which was based on ruins, inscriptions, and texts. And obviously, all of this also led to massive looting of artifacts to build collections for museums and classification and things like that. But the other side of this is that this documentation of the local history and how locals were using these materials has been really helpful in thinking through some of these questions that I have raised in the introduction of this paper. So these practices of documentation, classification, and collection continued through the 20th century by the Archaeological Survey of India and various state archaeology departments. These practices were geared towards building national and state collections by the addition of archaeological specimens in existing museums and were often tied to identity politics in colonial and post-colonial India. Richard Davis, while discussing the example of Didarganj Yakchi, has discussed how the movement of this sculpture to the Patna Museum resulted in the loss of original context and a new potential interpretation by the locals. In the museum setting, images like the Didarganj Yakchi were viewed merely as historical artifacts to be studied, examined, and exhibited to project a certain past of India as envisioned by the colonial powers. This treatment of historical sites and materials resulted not merely in the destruction of context of countless antiquities, but also the loss of multiple irrecoverable pasts that these artifacts were constitutive of. Gaya district was no exception to this pattern, and antiquities from the district can be found in several major European and American museums. Despite the uprooting of original context and a lack of understanding of these materials at multiple moments, several others are extant and continue to be used ritually at their site of discovery or in proximate distance from their place of discovery in the district, which I'll discuss. Some of these I'll discuss in this paper. Coming to the relevant historiography for this paper, Appadurai and Kopitov's study has triggered scholars to study the role of rematerialization in reconstituting histories at multiple moments. Drawing upon Kopitov's study, Richard Davis advocates that the Indian images are social beings with fluid identities, which were made repeatedly through interactions with humans. Taking this argument further, Catherine Baker, in her study of the architectural railings from Amravati, argues that scholars should also consider the ways in which objects, sites, and images may have been understood to exert their own authority over their interaction with humans. Davis and Baker, in their respective works, provide insights to examine the independent roles of material remains and human interactions in the addition of new layers to the existing history. Barry Flood posits these ideas together by arguing that a careful consideration of reuse as a positive mode of reception presents possibilities of multiple explanations that the reused materials may provide about the strategies of reuse and new meanings at multiple moments. Flood's approach actually provides a critical framework to examine the current uses of mounds, sculptures, and temples in constituting a sense of the past in the present. Now, rather than focusing on all of Magda, I would give you some examples from Gaya district itself, where you are currently located. In my survey, I have found 4 temples in the Gaya district where Buddhist figures are currently being worshipped as Brahmanical female goddesses. These sites include Dulhin Temple in Serghati, Devi Temple in Konchi and Vishnupur, and Ugratara Temple at Kespa. Though each of these images and temples have a specific history, I'll exclusively analyze the example of Ugratara Temple to investigate how the dematerialization of older materials is interwoven with the local history of Kespa village. Kespa example has been chosen to illustrate how the local history of the place rendered a new identity and popular recognition as an important goddess temple in the Gaya district. Located in the Tikari block of Gaya, Kespa is an early medieval Buddhist site with multiple Buddhist and Brahmanical images. Images are now kept in and around the Ugratara temple on the southern boundary of this village, and the remaining ones are kept at 2 other shrines. The central deity within this temple is a Hindu goddess who is named as Ugratara. A close examination revealed a Buddhist inscription on the still of this image, which points to it being a Buddhist figure. The image is currently being worshipped as the goddess Tara Devi. Buchanan Hamilton was the first to visit and report this site, though Begler also examined it in 1872-73. These are the colonial surveyors, and I have relied on their accounts of the place and the narratives that were in circulation at those moments. Buchanan's visit was spurred by information about the antiquity of this temple, which he received from a Gayawal Brahmin of Gaya. He was informed that the temple was 200 years old. Buchanan noted in his account that the square temple had a small building of bricks and clay of quite recent origin and was situated on the ruins of bricks and stones, indicating an older building. Buchanan's observation indicates his skeptical reading of the place and suspicion towards the locals. For him, the locals were always trying to conceal and not report truth, though he does not provide any explanation for false reporting by the locals. Perhaps he was more interested in configuring the older history, which was revealed through the local ruins and older sculptures kept inside the temple. It did not occur to him that what mattered to the locals was the sense of history in the present that they lived with, rather than a distant past, a positivist history that Buchanan and others were looking for. Buchanan's suspicions may also have emerged from the inaccessibility to the temple, as he was not allowed to enter the shrine, the sanctum. Moreover, he also found out through one of his assistants that the human-sized image was covered from the chin to the heels with a cotton cloth. He predicted the image to be a Gadadhar Vasudeva figure. Buchanan spoke with villagers to find out the origin story of this temple, which they narrated to him, and here I quote him. Tara Devi was a virtuous woman and married to an oilman. Simeta Raja, king named Bala here. Bala was an outrageous tyrant who attempted to control Tara Devi to gratify his lust. Tara Devi, being afraid of her virtue, prayed to her protecting goddess, and both she and Raja were converted into the stone. The virtuous Tara Devi is now in the temple, and the Bala Raja stands in a mango grove at some distance. Buchanan went to see the image of the Buddha. This open shrine of Bala is still in place, which is surrounded by images of Hindu gods and goddesses and sculptural fragments. The Bala image is a two-armed Buddha image with a Buddhist formula on the stele. The Tara Devi Bala story illustrates how the presence of these images in the villages led locals to weave a narrative for which there was no scriptural basis. Kopitov has argued that the biographies of things can make salient what might otherwise remain obscure. This is also evident in the case of Kespa, where the local history would have remained largely neglected or ignored unless one carefully scrutinizes the reusage of older sculptures. On examination, These images do indicate the early medieval history of the place when they were constructed. However, they also reveal a current past, which emerged due to the reusage of these older materials in a different context. It is in this current past with which most of the local communities and residents of this village relate with. Kopitov also suggests the significant role of reusage and cultural redefinition of past alien objects in connecting different cultures or time periods in this case. The installation of these images in a new ritual setting within the frame story of Tara Devi and Bala culturally redefines the images, thereby completing the process of rematerialization. This rematerialization links the place to a particular past, in addition to providing it a distinct identity as a place of religious and historical importance. This local history, that may not be fixed to a particular time frame historically, contrasts with the methods of positivist colonial history that tried to locate exact chronology of each object or temple. Buchanan got a test of this when he inquired the local Brahmin priests of the Ugratara temple about its date of construction and patron. Initially, they answered that it was constructed in the Satyuga. Later, the officiating priest told him it was needless to ask when a temple was built, as the gods are not work of men. This conversation can be analyzed in several ways. First, Buchanan may have been right in asserting that the locals did not want to reveal the truth. The locals may have doubted his intention or did not know why this question was of any importance to a Westerner who did not know until he showed up at the place. Second, the question was immaterial to them since they were not interested in digging the origins of this temple. What really, according to this history, the temple proved the presence of goddess Tara, the virtuous woman, and King Bala on their land, which continue to be present at the place till date. Their continued presence revealed the sacrality of the place in addition to creating a distinct identity for the place. In contrast, what mattered to Buchanan was the origin and primary identity of sculptures, which demonstrates his interest in exploring the origins and ancient past. The matter was inconsequential for local people, also because they had continued to worship the images. Even if the temple was constructed recently, it did not matter, since temples are built structures and may need to be replaced over time. What they certainly knew was the older antiquity of sculptures and their historical value, as these images were no longer being produced in the region. These images therefore became significant indicators of the enduring local history. This understanding of sculptures has resulted in their collection, preservation, and ritual uses in and around Ugratara temple of Kespa. Along with the Tara Devi several other Buddhist and Brahmanical sculptures are placed inside the sanctum. Unlike major temples, the sanctum here is not dedicated to any one god, but shared by all the images. In fact, many broken images the people to shrine outside and worshipped. The local community interprets each of these sculptures as a specific figure in a specific context, which could be a rural or a protector deity. The identification of these images as Buddhist by scholars in recent years has made locals aware of this historical reality, but that has not affected their religiosity or nature of relationship with these images. Each image is important to them because they or their parents or ancestors worship them. These images, irrespective of their sectarian affiliations or physical state, full or broken or fragmentary, evoke emotional and religious connections, and they continue to be a part of lived history. What needs to be emphasized is that the resituated context of these images and their redefinitions have resulted in their survival and preservation in their place of origin generally. This phenomenon has been tremendously beneficial to archaeologists and art historians who have relied on these images to reconstruct early medieval socio-religious and art history. In more recent scholarship, the incorporation of these images into local practices has led scholars to ask a different set of questions to avoid the prioritization of any single moment from the multiple lives of these images. And here I borrow the title of Richard Davis's book, Multiple Lives of Images. Each of these moments should be situated temporally and contextually to evaluate their role in the process of history writing. Let me move on to rural temples. Rematerialized early medieval temples within rural areas of Gaya illustrate the awareness of their historical importance amongst local communities, which have also forged new histories around these remains. Though I documented remains of early medieval temples and sites, only few are extant. Brahmanical traditions in the past may have been repaired at different times. At the site of Kurkihar and Main, the early medieval temples and they are almost in situ actually, are easily noticeable. Kurkihar was an early medieval Buddhist monastic site with significant Buddhist remains, including sculptures, architectural elements, and votive stupas that have been transformed into a Hindu temple. The temple, currently known as Devi Sthan Temple, has a Durga Mahishasur Mardini image in the sanctum. Most images within the temple are Buddhist and continue to be worshipped as Hindu gods and goddesses. Locals now know the Buddhist history of the place and the historical significance of Buddhist images. However, this knowledge has not made any difference in their ritual interactions with these images, as evinced in their placement within the Devi Sthan temple and bright red vermilion marks on their heads. And this would have been more evident if I had shown you pictures. Sorry about that. The Koteshwara Mahadev temple within the village of Main has a new exterior which is built over an early medieval temple. A significant collection of early medieval Brahmanical sculptures is kept in this temple and two other shrines within this village. This new evolving structure of Koteshwarnath Mahadev temple, made in Sikhara style, could have either replaced the older shrine or may have been constructed besides the older one. However, the villagers' decision to construct the new temple right over the older one shows the importance placed on the historicity and historic value of the older temple, which dates from the early medieval period. More recently, the village temple has emerged on the tourist and religious map of Bihar due to the local initiatives. A person from this village rose to the position of a high court judge and used his connections effectively to build local infrastructure and promote the place. He enlisted the Bihar Circle of Archaeological Survey of India to produce a brochure on the history of this village, a history of sculptural remains and the village. The brochure also contained several messages from eminent political leaders, including the current Chief Minister, Mr. Nitish Kumar, the then Ministers of Tourism, Tourism and Art and Culture, and several judges of the Supreme Court of India and the High Court of Bihar. In all these messages, the idea of protecting and generating awareness about this particular heritage and its history to the people of Bihar is emphasized. The Chief Minister's message especially emphasized the protection and dissemination of the glorious history of Bihar, of which the Koteshwara Mahadev is one such place. Website actually at one point of time, I don't think it exists any longer. The temple website also lists celebrations and cultural activities that have been organized at the site in the last few years. As a result of these developments, the Bihar government decided to celebrate Baba Koteshwara Mahadev Mahotsava on March 7, 2016. Another one was celebrated, I think, the following year in 2017. Now, a link to the website of this temple can be found on the website of Bihar State Tourism Development Corporation Limited, Government of Bihar. The website also enumerates its history to emphasize the historical importance and heritage value of the temple and the village. The website and the short ASI report clearly note the legendary account of construction of this temple by Usha, who was the daughter of Banasura. According to this narrative, Usa received instructions from none other than the god Shiva to construct a temple to fulfill her wish to marry Krishna's grandson Aniruddha in the Dwapara Yuga. She constructed the temple, which led to her marriage with Aniruddha. This Banasura and Usa story has become the historical narrative for the older temples and sculptures of Main village. This Banasura is also connected to the archaeological site of Sonpur, which is not too far actually from this place. The Sonpur Mound, which actually was excavated in 1960s and has a history from Chalcolithic to early historic period, which is roughly 2nd, 3rd century of the Common Era, is known locally as the Banasura Ka Garh, Mound of Banasura. Banasura, son of Asura king Bali, is a legendary figure from the Hindu epic of Mahabharata and Bhagavad Purana literature. This association of an older settlement mound abandoned in the early historic period with a mythical legendary figure of religious texts is also evident at the sacred center of Gaya. As widely known, Gaya is linked to the mythology of Gayasura, which transformed it into a sacred funerary center in the early medieval period. And I don't need to get into that. Given Gaya's prestige and proximate location, it may seem that the local inhabitants, in establishing this association, may have drawn from the Gaya example. However, this association should not be seen merely as an attempt to copy Gaya and its legends. Instead, this association, I argue, demonstrates how locals made sense of material traces from the past. Even though the locals may have been aware of the Gaya example, they are not attempting to compete with Gaya. This association with the Banasura also demonstrates that the locals imagined the larger region of Gaya to be the place of Asuras. This imagination elucidates an attempt to build on the Gaya example but also raises questions about local inhabitants' perception of their ancestors and their own past. This Banasura narrative, interspersed across the rural landscape of this part, Belaganj block of Gaya district, has vivified and rejuvenated the Koteshwar Mahadev temple and became the official historical narrative as indicated by the ASI produced brochure and Government of Bihar tourism website. Both of these emphasize the links between Banasura and the village of Main. In fact, the ASI brochure has also articulated a direct link with Shiva by stressing that Shivanagri was the original name of this village. The production of this new history was informed by local initiatives towards preservation, generating awareness, and using political and administrative influence. Consequently, the name of Koteshwar Mahadev temple now figures prominently in the Siva circuit, which is being developed to promote tourism in Bihar. This example, therefore, enunciates the transformation of history of a place and how it is continually being rewritten in dialogue with the present. Now, on to the conclusion. Anthropologist Keith Basu, while discussing Apache landscape, argues that placemaking is a common response to common curiosities about a place by its inhabitants and local communities. It relies on multiple acts of remembering and imagining and available visual tools or accounts that interact in complex ways to create and produce a history of the place. In this way, placemaking is a way of constructing history itself, of inventing it, of fashioning novel versions of what happened here. Basu's insights provide a productive frame to explain the dynamic process of history making that is in motion through the interpretation of the main temple, Kespa images, and Sonpur Mound. These historical remains provide people an opportunity to think about past, interpret them, and imagine them afresh at distinct places. Sorry about that. In the cases of images and temples, what is noticeable is the way place comes into being through practice and discourse. Brodmann has argued that a place comes explicitly into being in the discourse of its inhabitants and particularly in the rhetoric it promotes. This also demonstrates how they are situated in a real world. The images of Kespa, with their narrative and ritual usage, have transformed the place into a regional center, whereas Main's temple, with its narrative, has become a tourist and a Shava center. Their narratives now are beginning to become established as normative history as these places gain state recognition and increased public attention. In interpreting and developing these narratives, the inhabitants engage with myths, legends, religious texts, and folklore as source materials. This is evident in the case of Sonpur Mound and Main Temple, both of which revolve around the Banasura legend. The methods used by the locals are distinct from that of the conventional scholars as they do not adhere to the norms of academic ways of writing history. Basu points out that the nature of, and here I quote, the nature of this history narrative may be local, episodic, not definitive, weakly empirical, thinly chronological, and oral. It does not advance theories, tests no hypothesis, and offers no general models. What it does instead is fashion possible words, give them expressive shape, and present them for contemplation as images of the past that can deepen and enlarge awareness of the present. It is an indispensable guide to the past. Basu therefore articulates the importance of this history for creating a dialogue between the past and the present. This ongoing dialogue is manifested in all the examples presented in this paper. In his recent book, Jacob Kinnard has examined and critiqued the implications of the World Heritage designation of Bodh Gaya in 2001, which was presented as an exclusive Buddhist place as a result of top-down approach. In this approach, the authority rested with the ASI, the Bodh Gaya Temple Management Committee, and the UNESCO Charter to decide how the place ought to be viewed and its history experienced by the diverse body of visiting pilgrims, tourists, and local inhabitants. In contrast, the examples discussed in this paper demonstrate a bottom-up and a more organic approach that locals work with to interpret and construct their own distinct history. These local histories cannot be gleaned from texts and will remain irrecoverable unless we examine the threads of interactions between people and the material remains in their specific context. These local and micro histories are important indicators of multiple histories that operate and inform daily lives of the people of the Gaya district and the larger Magda region. Thank you.
So, अभी जो बातें कहीं, तो उस बातों का सार ये था कि ही वॉज टॉकिंग अबाउट द री यूसेज ऑफ सेक्रेड साइट्स, और जो मल्टीपल जो हिस्ट्रीज है कैसे बिल्डअप हुआ है, और जो एक बात अंत में उन्होंने कही, इट इज़ इन दिस वे दैट द पास्ट कनेक्ट टू द प्रेजेंट। तो इसको मैं ये ऐड करना चाहूँगा कि अनलेस यू अंडरस्टैंड द प्रेजेंट वेल, in order to understand the present well, you need to understand the past well, and in order to understand the past well, you need to understand the present well. तो फिर उन्होंने जो बात कही कि कॉलोनियल हिस्टोग्राफी को वो पास्ट से ज़्यादा मतलब था, और वो एंशिएंट पास्ट की बात कर रहा था, उन स्ट्रक्चर्स की बात कर रहा था, लेकिन समय के अंतराल के साथ ये जो नैरेटिव जो है ये चेंज किया। उस साइट सेक्रेड रहा, लेकिन वहाँ रहने वाले जो लोग जो थे, इन लोगों ने उसका अपने वे में यूज़ किया। तो साइट की तो सैंक्टिटी बनी हुई है, और इन्होंने जो 3 केस स्टडीज़ दिया, एक केस्पा का दिया जो उग्र तारा देवी का जो मंदिर है, तो आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट के हिसाब से हैमिल्टन, बुकैनन, कनिंघम एंड ऑल बेगलार, तो बुद्धिस्ट साइट था। लेकिन महत्वपूर्ण ये है कि उसका इस्तेमाल कैसे हो रहा है। आज जो वहाँ वर्तमान में जो रिलीजियस ट्रेडिशन है, तो वो इट इज़ बीइंग वर्शिप्ड एज उग्र तारा देवी। भले ही आप उसको सिचुएट कर लीजिए आर्कियोलॉजिकली कि वो बुद्ध साइट होगा, तो हम लोग जो हैं एकेडमिक चीज़ों पे जब हम लोग फोकस करते हैं, तो जो साइट पर क्या हो रहा है, जो बहु संस्कृतियाँ जो यहाँ पनप रही हैं, जिनका पारस्परिक इंटरैक्शन, उसको हम इग्नोर नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो कोई भी अगर आप इतिहास लिखिए, कोई भी नैरेटिव लिखिए, वर्तमान में क्या उस साइट का किस तरह से इस्तेमाल हो रहा है, आप उसको इग्नोर नहीं कर सकते हैं। जो इन्होंने बात कही, क्योंकि इन्होंने फील्ड वर्क किया है इस इलाके में, जो फील्ड वर्कर रहता है उसने नज़दीक से देखा है इन सब चीज़ों को। इनका आर्कियोलॉजिकल गैजेटर ऑफ गया डिस्ट्रिक्ट है, तो और तो बहुत ही काम है। और गया को इन्होंने, भले न्यूयॉर्क में है लेकिन गया के हैं, बिहार के हैं, इसी क्षेत्र के हैं, घूम घूम कर काम इन्होंने किया है। तो एक बात इन्होंने कही कि ठीक है, बोध गया को हम लोगों ने हेरिटेज साइट बना दिया। सवेरे मैं भी, सूरज जी भी पॉइंट कर रहे थे, तो मल्टीपल, तो सवाल है कि आपने एक्सक्लूसिव उसको बना दिया कि, और बुद्धिस्ट खाली वो महाबोधि टेम्पल तक आपने कर दिया, बस वही हमारा हेरिटेज है, बाकी जो है उसके बाहर में कोई हेरिटेज हमारा है नहीं। तो आपने क्या किया, आपने इग्नोर कर दिया कि इस इलाके का एक मल्टीपल पास्ट है, इसको आपने इग्नोर किया। तो जब तक इन नैरेटिव्स को आप जब तक एक ड्यू प्लेस अकॉर्ड नहीं करेंगे, सेंसिटिवाइज नहीं करेंगे, और खाली एकेडमिक रिगर के एंगल से आप उनकी ऐतिहासिकता में ही देखेंगे, तो वह एक निर्जीव ऐतिहासिकता रहेगी। इसी चीज़ को लेकर ये चल रहे थे। फिर कोटेश्वर महादेव की बात कही, ठीक है बुद्धिस्ट साइट रहा होगा, लेकिन अभी वर्तमान यूसेज क्या है, आप क्या कर सकते हैं। और इसको जानना इसलिए भी ज़रूरी है कि जो सोशोलॉजिकल, जो एंथ्रोपोलॉजिकल जो एक्टिविटीज़ हो रहा है, जो प्रोसेसेस है, आप तभी समझ पाइएगा कैसे लोग अपने उसको इमेज कर रहे हैं, कैसे वर्शिप कर रहे हैं, उनकी ज़िंदगी उससे जुड़ी हुई है, वो समाज जो वहाँ पर पनपा है, उसके इर्द गिर्द पनपा है। इन्हीं बातों को अभिषेक अमर जी कह रहे थे। धन्यवाद सर, एम आई राइट? आप इन्हीं चीज़ों पर फोकस कर रहे थे। एंड नाउ आई विल ओपन द डिस्कशन टू द ऑडियंस। आप जो सवाल पूछना है पूछिए। हाँ, how will they connect with him?
हाँ आ रही है, बोलिए।
क्या नहीं?
आपने केस्पा मंदिर के बारे में चर्चा की, मैं तो गया नहीं हूँ, आपसे सुन रहा हूँ। तो हेरिटेज बनाने के लिए जरूरी होता है कि कितने साल पुरानी मंदिर है। तो केस्पा में जो तारा देवी की मंदिर है, जो मंदिर देवी की है, वो कितने साल पुरानी मंदिर है, ये मैं जानना चाहूँगा।
देखिए, हेरिटेज बनाने के लिए ना, वो मुझे लगता है ये आइडिया ही गलत है। बेसिक क्वेश्चन जो है, डेफिनेशन जो है, इतना साल पुराना होना चाहिए, वो अप्रोच ही गलत है। ये तो आप कॉलोनियल वाले में फंस गए, जो अंग्रेजों का बना हुआ फ्रेम उसमें फंस गए। वो डिफाइन करने के लिए हो सकता है, पॉलिसी मेकिंग के लिए जरूरी हो कि आप इस तरह से डिफाइन करें, लेकिन हेरिटेज तो हर दिन बनता है आपके सामने में, उसको आप कैप्चर कैसे करते हैं वो ज्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट हमको लगता है। और डिफाइन करने के लिए कुछ पैरामीटर्स होना चाहिए। अगर आप उस पर्सपेक्टिव से पूछ रहे हैं तो हाँ, पैरामीटर्स होना चाहिए, लेकिन पैरामीटर ये होना चाहिए कि लोग उससे कैसे एंगेज करते हैं, लोग कैसे उसको समझते हैं, उनके एवरीडे लाइफ से कैसे रिलेट करता है। इन चीज़ों पे हम फोकस करें तो ये सब जो सवाल है ना कि कितना पुराना है, केस्पा मंदिर कितना पुराना है, वो कोई आपको नहीं बता सकता है। महाबोधि टेम्पल कितना पुराना है, आप यूनेस्को का रिपोर्ट पढ़ दीजिए और मैं आपको 10 आपको एग्जाम्पल दूंगा जिससे प्रूव हो जाएगा कि उसका डेटिंग गलत है, ठीक है। लेकिन वो यूनेस्को वर्ल्ड हेरिटेज साइट है, क्योंकि हम लोग यूनेस्को को अथॉरिटी बना दिए और डिसाइड किए कि वो जो कहेगा वही सही है। तो ये अप्रोच ही गलत है। जब हम गांव में जाएंगे, लोगों से बात करेंगे और लोगों से समझेंगे, तब हमको समझ में आएगा कि हेरिटेज होता क्या है, इसका वैल्यू कैसे करना है। तो वो समझना मुझे लगता है ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है। केस्पा के हिस्टोरिसिटी पे अगर आप बात करना चाहते हैं तो मैं कहूंगा कि वहाँ जो स्कल्पचर्स हमको मिले हैं वो अर्ली मिडिवल पीरियड से मिले हैं, जो कि रफली 7 से 12वीं शताब्दी, 7वीं से 12वीं शताब्दी के बीच का है। तो वहाँ कोई एक टेम्पल रहा होगा, क्योंकि आर्किटेक्चरल मटीरियल भी वहाँ मिला है, सिर्फ स्कल्पचर्स ही नहीं मिले। तो हिस्टोरिकली हम वहाँ तक जा सकते हैं। वहाँ मुझे कोई पॉटरी, अब मुझे देखना पड़ेगा रिकॉर्ड्स के, पॉटरी वहाँ मुझे मिला था और कितना पुराना मिला था। तो ये मैं स्कल्पचर्स के बेसिस पे कह सकता हूँ कि वहाँ डेफिनेटली 7वीं से 12वीं के बीच में कोई मंदिर रहा होगा। लेकिन अगर आप स्ट्रक्चरल एंटिक्विटी में जाइएगा तो जो स्ट्रक्चर है वो तो बनता रहता है, टेम्पल टूटता है, लोग बनाते हैं। हर जगह है कि टेम्पल पुराना, लोग अगर खराब हो गया, टूट गया, तो लोग तुरंत बगल में नया खड़ा कर देते हैं, उसी को रिपेयर करते हैं।
पूछिए आप, पूछो। और आगे आ जाओ थोड़ा, धन्यवाद से आवाज आएगी कि नहीं। माइक ले लो, आगे आ जाओ, आगे आ जाओ।
सबसे पहले तो मैं थैंक यू बोलूँगा, क्योंकि मोस्ट ऑफ डिबेट है जो सर इस देश में मंदिर मस्जिद पर ही खत्म हो जाता है, लेकिन यहाँ मंदिर के साथ साथ वह जो बौद्ध स्तूप है उसकी भी बात हो रही है। क्योंकि जब हम लोग इस डिबेट में फंसते हैं तो देखते हैं कि जब, तो सर मैं क्वेश्चन समझा नहीं पाऊंगा ना फिर सर।
हाँ, उसको प्रिसाइजली डिफाइन करो।
सर मेरा 2 क्वेश्चन है, एक तो डॉक्टर अभिषेक से है और एक सर आपसे है।
उन्हीं से क्वेश्चन, उन्हीं से पूछना है।
नहीं सर, आपके रिमार्क्स पे मेरा सवाल उत्पन्न हुआ था इसीलिए। सो डॉक्टर अभिषेक से मेरा सवाल है, कैन आई नो अबाउट द सोर्सेज। उन्होंने किस सोर्सेज के आधार पे इस तरीके का इतना सारा लंबा सा एक आर्गूमेंट दिया है, तो मैं सोर्सेज के बारे में जानना चाहता हूँ। और दूसरी बात सर, आपने कही कि जो अभी के दौर में उस चीज का प्रयोग कैसे हो रहा है यह इम्पोर्टेंट है। मुझे लगता है कि सर सिर्फ इतना ही बात नहीं होनी चाहिए, क्योंकि उसका पास्ट क्या रहा है यह तो इम्पोर्टेंट है ही, क्योंकि वर्तमान सरकार उस तरीके का बहुत सारा काम और बहुत सारा एक्शन ली है।
बात समझ में आ गई है और
आपका सवाल उसके जवाब देते हैं, सिंपल जवाब
क्वेश्चन उन्हीं को एड्रेस
सोर्सेज सिंपल है, आर्कियोलॉजिकल सोर्सेज है। गांव में जाइएगा आपको सब दिख जाएगा, सोर्सेज सिंपल है। और अगर गांव में जाने की इच्छा नहीं हो और ऐसी मटेरियल पढ़ना है तो केपी जायसवाल इंस्टीट्यूट से गैजेटियर छपा है गया डिस्ट्रिक्ट का, उसमें देख लीजिए, सारा सोर्सेज आपको मिल जाएगा।
हुआ है, फिलहाल उसको देख लीजिए।
सर मेरा प्रश्न है सर कि मनीष सर से प्रश्न है। आप सर कह रहे थे कि
हम चेयर में हैं, यू शुड एड्रेस टू हिम।
जी सर,
हमने उनको
थैंक यू
खाली पूछो तुम।
हाँ, डॉक्टर अभिषेक सर से हमारा प्रश्न है कि केसबा का जो मंदिर है वो अगर बुद्धिस्ट साइट है और पास्ट में जो आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट हुए हैं वो बुद्धिस्ट साइट उसको अनाउंस किए, लेकिन प्रेजेंट में उस पर जो प्रैक्टिस हो रहा है वो अलग तरीके से हो रहा है। तो एज ए जो हिस्टोग्राफी में जब रैंके को पढ़ते हैं तो पाते हैं कि हिस्ट्री को ऑब्जेक्टिविटी होना चाहिए। जी सर, तो जब वो है ये मान लिया गया है हिस्टोरियन, क्योंकि हिस्टोरियन को ये काम दिया गया है कि आप देखिए वो बुद्धिस्ट साइट है या कौन सा साइट है, और उन्होंने माना है राइटिंग्स में कि वो बुद्धिस्ट साइट है, और प्रेजेंट में प्रैक्टिस अगर मल्टीकल्चरलाइजेशन का हो रहा है तो इसको हम कैसे जस्टिस कर पाएंगे, ये मेरा क्वेश्चन है।
देखिए आपका सवाल बहुत सिंपल है, साधारण है। आपको बताते हैं क्यों कि इतिहास ना खत्म नहीं हो गया 12वीं शताब्दी में। इतिहास चलता रहता है। हम लोग जो अभी कर रहे हैं ना, कल सुबह वो इतिहास होगा, 2 घंटे बाद वो इतिहास होगा। तो इतिहास खत्म नहीं हो गया। तो एक हो सकता है, एक समय रहा हो जब वहाँ बुद्धिस्ट टेम्पल था, बुद्धिस्ट मोनास्टिक इंस्टीट्यूशन भी हो सकता है, कुछ भी हो सकता है। और जो अभी का हिस्ट्री है उसका 200 साल का, जो मुझे सोर्सेस के थ्रू दिखता है, वो हिंदू हिस्ट्री है। तो जस्टिस हम लोग करने वाले कौन है? जो लोग वहाँ है ना, वो ओन करते हैं उस पास। हम तो बाहर से जाकर के पढ़ते हैं, देखते हैं, ऑब्जेक्टिविटी लाते हैं, और ऑब्जेक्टिविटी कुछ होता नहीं है, हर आदमी सब्जेक्टिव होता है। कोई जो हम लोग, वी वांट टू बी एज ऑब्जेक्टिव एज पॉसिबल, अनबायस्ड इज अ बेटर वर्ड आई थिंक, बट we all bring our own subjectivity to the questions that we ask, the way we approach our sources, the way we think about historical questions, the way we frame arguments, the way we engage with sources.
और यानी किसी और का
मेरा
कोई
एक सवाल है।
हाँ, सूरज।
मैं सूरज अभिषेक सर
अच्छा,
आपसे
हाँ, बोलिए ना।
क्यूरियोसिटी है, मैं जानना चाह रहा हूँ कि हम लोग मल्टीपल कंपीटिंग आइडेंटिटी है हमारे इंडियन सोसाइटी में जहाँ हम रहते हैं, और एक पॉपुलर कल्चर को एक डोमिनेंट ट्रेड्स में बदलने में, और उस ट्रेडिशन को फिर हम ले जाते हैं, तो हेरिटेज के फॉर्मेशन में स्टेट की क्या भूमिका होती है? मैं आपसे चाहता हूँ कि उस पर रिफ्लेक्ट करें।
देखिए, हम लोग स्टेट वाला एंगल थोड़ा ज्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स हो जाता है, क्योंकि स्टेट मतलब पावर डिफाइन करता है ना बहुत सारे चीजों को, अथॉरिटी डिफाइन करती है। जैसे यूनेस्को, बोध गया का जो डेजिग्नेशन है, अब वो यूनेस्को के लिए है। तो जो हम डोजिए प्रिपेयर किए, भारत सरकार ने प्रिपेयर किया, एएसआई ने प्रिपेयर किया, वो यूनेस्को के स्टैंडर्ड। तो ये जो हेरिटेज फॉर्मेशन है, टॉप डाउन अप्रोच, वो बहुत ही यूरोसेंट्रिक है। मुझे लगता है यूरोप से जो मॉडल निकल के आया, हम अभी भी वही यूरोसेंट्रिक मॉडल में फंसे हुए हैं। तो स्टेट में जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, माइंडसेट वही है। अब हम उसको रिवर्स करें अगर, और ग्राउंड लेवल पे देखें, जैसे कि केस्पा से ज्यादा अच्छा कोटेश्वर महादेव का एग्जाम्पल है, कि वहाँ टेम्पल था, स्कल्पचर था, लोगों ने थोड़ा इनिशिएटिव लिया, गांव से एक बड़े हाई कोर्ट के जज हो गए, उन्होंने एएसआई वाले को बुला लिया। अब वो पावर के हिसाब से डिफाइन हो गया। अब हाई कोर्ट का सिटिंग जज अगर बोले एएसआई को, तो एएसआई करना पड़ेगा लोकल स्टेट सर्किल को। वो गए, अब वहाँ काम हुआ। वो फिर बिहार धार्मिक न्यास बोर्ड वाले पहुंच गए, उन लोगों ने कहा अच्छा टेम्पल तो यहाँ इंटैक्ट है, इसके ऊपर हम पूरा एक बड़ा टेम्पल बना देते हैं। तो उन्होंने साउथ इंडियन स्टाइल में, शिखरा स्टाइल में अलग से टेम्पल बना दिया। तो वो जो लेयरिंग होता है हिस्ट्री का, वो कहीं ना कहीं पावर और रिसोर्सेज के बेस पे डिफाइन होता है। लेकिन यहाँ जो अप्रोच है वो इंस्टेड ऑफ टॉप डाउन, बॉटम से अप है। हेलो,
किसी और का कोई सवाल है? Anybody else? थैंक यू अमर जी। और किसी का सवाल तो अब नहीं है ना? और अभिषेक अमर जी न्यूयॉर्क से हमसे जुड़े, और इस डायलॉग्स के एक बहुत ही इंटीग्रल पार्ट हैं, खास करके इनका जो स्कॉलरशिप है और जो रिसर्च है वो मुजफ्फरपुर में है अभी तो आ जाना चाहिए था यहाँ। तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सबके तरफ से, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। लेकिन आपको आना चाहिए था, अगर आप आते तो और अच्छा रहता।
बात करेंगे आपसे, ठीक है।
धन्यवाद।
ठीक है मनीष, ठीक, थैंक यू, धन्यवाद।
आपके आपके साथ फील्ड पर काम करने वाले आए हुए थे, रवि जी थे आज।
अच्छा, सॉरी।
थैंक यू।
Thank you, Abhishek ji. Thank you, Manish ji.
थैंक्स।
Moving on to the last segment of today, I will request everybody to turn their chairs around to the other side. We will be having a very special performance by a renowned Odissi dancer, Kavita Dwivedi ji.
and we have a very special guest with us, and this is a very special performance that has been conducted. Very impromptu, that is why this whole stage